Hey, it's Michael J. This week a student asked me an interesting question, and I thought it would make a good video conversation. So the question was, why did I move from New York? And I started to describe it, and I realized I needed to go back to why I moved to New York in the first place in 2000, and then lived there for 14 years before deciding that it was time to come back to California.
I have been involved with theater since I was 8 years old. I grew up in the small town of Placerville in Northern California and went to college in Salinas and Sacramento, not all that far away from home. I naturally segued from college to Sacramento's professional musical theater company, known today as Broadway Sacramento, and I worked there in a variety of capacities for all of the 1990s. Along the way, I was busy building my resume as a director in the Sacramento area. At a certain point, after I'd done everything I could do in the theater in Sacramento twice, I made a serious plan to move to New York where I could really pursue my career as a director. And at any rate, I'd be in the middle of the theater mecca of the USA, whatever happened. Also, I had 13 friends who had already migrated to New York, so I'd have friends and connections. My friend Amy was also moving to New York, and so we decided to team up and become roommates. Amy set out a month before me to stay with our friend Christopher and to find an apartment, which she did. I was able to fly in and take a cab right to my new doorstep. It was a roomy second-floor apartment in Astoria, Queens, with easy subway access to Midtown Manhattan. I lived there for 11 years with various roommates. I spent the first 6 months as an office temp and an usher at Studio 54, where a revival of Cabaret was playing. Then I took a job working for Music Theater International, a theatrical licensing organization that was started by Frank Lesser, composer of Guys and Dolls, and managed Stephen Sondheim's musicals, among many others. I was thrilled to have a show business job, but the pay was low on the scale. I could have done just as well as an office temp, and in fact, I was potentially going to be hired at a decent salary at a place I had been working for 3 months. But I know that I would have hated it in time, and the work had nothing to do with my career goals. At least MTI was part of show business. MTI was a great place to work that offered me a lot of interesting opportunities. Surrounding that, I directed projects in the off-Broadway world. Some of them got a lot of attention, and most of them flew under the radar the way hundreds of other little projects did in that city. My second year in, I got my first directing job doing a production of The Student Prince at a company that did showcase productions in the basement of an old elementary school in Brooklyn, the Gallery Players. They had a regular season of well-known shows and operated like a community theater, only the talent was emerging professional artists. All of us, from the design team to the actors, were all relatively new to New York and wanted to make good. The success of The Student Prince led to a bigger production, Dearest Enemy, a rare Rodgers and Hart show with a restored orchestration. This was right up my alley. It was well produced and received a lot of attention. Lots of interesting people of the theater world attended and shook my hand. I hoped that it would lead to the next big thing. The very next thing was a job assisting director John Rando, who had directed the hit Broadway musical Urinetown, on a City Center Encore's production of The Pajama Game. That production was full of A-list players, and it felt good to be working right in the middle of quote-unquote Broadway. My friend Bruce Pomahak, who was the director of music at Rodgers and Hammerstein, and who had helped me a lot with my graduate school thesis project, he says to me, "Kid, I know it feels good to be involved with all those great people, but you can't assist directors anymore. You've done enough of that and you have to move on." I knew he was right, but on the other hand, I was trying to get my foot in the door. I had a few little successes. I was writing a lot and I had some traction with my play A Taste of Heaven, a one-act that had 4 different productions over 2 years. I also had a great production of my play Revolution with a 2-year option with producers who might have moved it to a commercial venue, and perhaps my career would have finally moved out of the off-Broadway world. But that turned out to be my last directing project, and it was 7 years into my 14 years in New York. The next 7 years, I continued my work with MTI and also started writing theater reviews for Examiner.com and the Off-Broadway Review. Meanwhile, I was still writing plays and trying to get something theatrical going. In 2013, I agreed to fly back to Sacramento to be an adjudicator for the Linnea High School Theater Festival. I was working with students again. I had done some private studio teaching in the late 1990s, and I found over that 3-day festival that I was really good at connecting with teenagers and helping them to improve their performances in a short amount of time. On my flight back to New York, I decided that I was going to go back into theater education. And if I was going to make that big change, I should go back to California and be closer to my family again. I looked ahead 10 years to consider what my New York life would be like with MTI, and no one was retiring anytime soon, so it was unlikely that I'd move into a new position with more money and more interesting work. The last 3 years, I had moved into a basement studio apartment and wasn't getting ahead in any way you could measure, though I continued to enjoy and take advantage of a lot of what New York had to offer. I saw 50 productions a year, loved all the film festivals and world cinema available, explored neighborhoods and museums, and enjoyed all my friends, but it was also a grind to stay afloat. That experience with the high school theater festival, combined with the reality of my life at 14 years in New York, just caused a shift in me, and I started making my exit plan. That was in February 2014, and by the end of May 2014, I was on a plane for California for good. Fate was kind, because as I had a summer job working at my old stomping grounds with Broadway Sacramento, a job teaching theater opened up at Christian Brothers High School, and I took it. I've been there for almost 11 years now, directing productions and teaching theater. I live in William Lamb Park, which is the equivalent of living on Central Park in New York, which of course would be enviable if I ever could have afforded such a place to live in New York. Today, I'm not counting every penny or worrying about getting the rent paid. I have an easy commute to work. I'm using all the skills I learned in college as well as my time in New York to give back to young people interested in the theater. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, but I don't regret my time in New York at all. That was all worth it. There's that line in The Musical Company that has always resonated with me. It goes something like, "There's a time to come to New York and a time to leave." That's not true for everyone, but it's been true for a lot of the New York friends I've had, and it was true for me. I needed to go to New York, but I had my fill, and I can always go back to visit, which I do.